The image on the screen was of a colossal plume of smoke and ash. A gray monster clawing its way towards the heavens. Below it, a serene, tropical landscape trembled. His voice was as clinical as the data points I was presenting. This is Mount Pinatubo. 1,971. The second largest terrestrial eruption of the 20th century. It ejected roughly 0 billion tons of magma and cooled the entire planet to 0.5 degrees Celsius. I clicked to the next slide, satellite image swirling with the angry spiral of a super typhoon. This is Haiyan, or Yolanda, as it was locally known. One of the most powerful tropical cyclones ever recorded. Winds reaching 315 kilometers per hour. Click. An earthquake seismograph. Its needle frantically scratching a story of devastation. The Moro Gulf earthquake and tsunami. 1,976. Magnitude 8. 0. Over 8. 000 casualties. I've paused, letting the silence in the mahogany-paneled room amplify the weight of the disasters. I look at the faces of FV colleagues at the United States Geological Survey academics. Scientists. Risk assessors like myself. They saw data. But saw something more, a pattern of relentless, almost malevolent, natural force. Pointed diva laser at the map of the Philippines. A scattered archipelago sitting squarely on the dreaded Pacific Ring of Fire. My question has always been a simple one. I said. LV voice dropping. LV would anyone, with all this data, with all this history, consciously choose to live on a land that is actively trying to kill them? Hello everyone. My name is E.C. Alan Carter. For 30 years, I was a geologist. A man of science. I believed only in what I could measure, quantify, and predict. Rocks, fault lines, magma viscosity, these were my truths. And the truth about the Philippines was that it was, scientifically speaking, one of the most dangerous places on Earth. A beautiful, yet fundamentally flawed piece of geology. Today, I want to tell you about a journey that completely changed my life. A story of how the Philippines shattered all the preconceptions. Not with data or with graphs, but with its heart. A heart that beats with the fire of its volcanoes. My journey began not with excitement, but with reluctance. His new research grant had been approved, a joint project to reassess the lahar floodplains around Pinatubo. For envy superiors, it was a prestigious opportunity. For me, it felt like punishment. Another trip to the tropics. Another immersion into heat, humidity, and what perceived as organized chaos. Packed the bags with a heavy heart. My mind already filled with images from disaster documentaries and risk assessment reports. I saw crowded cities, flimsy infrastructure, a population perpetually at the mercy of the earth and the air. In my mind, I wasn't going to the country. I was deploying to the disaster zone. A living laboratory of everything that could go wrong. The flight to Manila was long and unremarkable. I spent the hours poring over topographical maps and historical eruption data, reinforcing the biases with every statistic. When the plane finally descended, the view from my window did little to dissuade me. A sprawling megacity. A seemingly endless carpet of concrete and tin roofs shimmered under a hazy, oppressive sun. The air that greeted me as step out of the Ninoy Aquino International Airport was thick. Wet blanket. It was a mixture of exhaust fumes, humidity, and 1,000 unfamiliar smells. The symphony of the city was cacophony of car horns, distant sirens, and the shouts of countless people moving in every direction. This, as thought with grim certainty, was exactly as I had pictured it. Chaos. Isvay assigned local liaison was waiting for me just outside customs. She held a small sign with envy name on it. Her name was Isabel Reyes, but she insisted call her Isa. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with a smile that seemed too bright for the weary environment. Welcome to the Philippines. Chay. Carter. Mabuhay, she said. Her energy is stark contrast to my own jet-lagged cynicism. I managed to polite, but tired smile. Thank you for meeting me. And laugh. Reyes. Isa. Please. She corrected gently. And it's the pleasure. We're very excited to have you here. Your work on pyroclastic flow dynamics is required reading at the university. I nodded, acknowledging the compliment without warmth. For me, this was a job. Nothing more. The drive from the airport to my hotel in Makati was an experience in itself. I had seen traffic before in Los Angeles, in New York, in London. But this was different. This wasn't a line of cars. It was a living, breathing organism. Lanes were suggestions, not rules. Motorcycles, adorned with a myriad of colors and carrying entire families, weaved through impossibly small gaps. Colorful jeepneys, packed to the brim with passengers, blasted music and belched diesel smoke. It was a testament to human improvisation, a chaotic ballet of near misses and shared patience. I gripped the door handle, knuckles white, and my scientific mind, trained to find order in the geological chaos of the earth, could find no logic here. Is it always like this? I asked Isa, unable to hide the astonishment in every voice. She laughed. A light, easy sound. This isn't so bad, Doctor. You should see it on a Friday payday before a long weekend. She seemed completely unfazed, navigating the chaos with practiced ease, pointing out landmarks as if we were on a leisurely tour. That's the Mall of Asia on your right, one of the biggest in the world. And up ahead, you'll see the... I barely listened. If my mind was already cataloging the risks, the lack of adherence to traffic laws, the density of the population, the proximity to the coast. In case of an earthquake, I thought, evacuation would be impossible. This city was a death trap. In my hotel was a modern tower of glass and steel, a sterile oasis in the middle of the urban jungle. It was comfortable, air-conditioned, and blessedly quiet. It was a slice of the world I was familiar with, and I clung to it. The first few days were spent in meetings at the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, or PHIVOLCS. The local scientists were bright and dedicated, but our discussions always seemed to have an undercurrent of philosophical difference. I would present models of potential devastation, statistical probabilities of eruption, and worst-case scenarios. They would listen patiently, then talk about their community-based warning systems, their evacuation drills in schools, and the legends their grandparents told them about the mountains. I found it unscientific. Folklore and community spirit were not variables you could input into a hazard assessment model. Respect for the mountain is important, one senior scientist told me. But preparing the people is even more so. I saw it as a quaint, but ultimately inefficient, way of dealing with a mortal threat. One afternoon, Isa took me to the old walled city of Intramuros. I had initially protested, wanting to use the time to review soil composition data from the 1991 eruption. But she was insistent. You can't understand the land without understanding its story, Doctor, she had said. We walked along cobblestone streets, past old Spanish churches and fortifications. The air was thick with history. But even here, I couldn't switch off my geologist's brain. Pointed to the walls. These stones, I said to Isa. They're volcanic tuff, likely from an ancient eruption in the Laguna de Bay caldera. Durable, but porous. Isa smiled. That's true. But they also absorb the sound of cannons, the prayers of the faithful, and the cries of revolutionaries. They hold memories. I saw building material. She saw, I saw. The disparity between our worldviews was becoming clearer and more pronounced with each passing hour. I saw a nation built on geological knife's edge, its foundations made from the very material of its potential destruction. She saw a nation built from the ashes of its past, resilient and full of stories. At the time, I was convinced the view was the correct one, the only one that mattered, the one based on cold, hard, undeniable fact. I had no idea that the facts were only a teeny fraction of the truth. My education was about to begin. The journey to the province of Zambales, to the foot of the great volcano itself, was scheduled for the end of the week. In the meantime, Isa insisted on continuing the cultural immersion, as she cheerfully called it. I called it series of inefficient detours. She took me to a bustling market in Quiapo, a place so dense with humanity it felt like a single living organism. The smells were overwhelming: sweet tropical fruits, pungent dried fish, fragrant flowers for the nearby church, and the ever-present scent of street food being cooked over charcoal. I saw it all as a series of health and safety violations. She saw it as the vibrant pulse of the city. One evening, she convinced me to try a local eatery, carinderia, instead of the sterile safety of a hotel restaurant. It was an open-air establishment, a symphony of sizzling oil and clattering plates. I watched, with deep suspicion, as the cook handled food with her bare hands. I ordered simple grilled chicken and rice, and drank only from a sealed bottle of water. Isa, on the other hand, ordered a dish called sinigangas or tamarind broth with pork and vegetables. The steam that rose from her bowl was fragrant, and despite the reservations, I felt a strange pang of something. Not quite envy, but curiosity refused to acknowledge. It's our comfort food, she explained, spooning the hot broth. Perfect for a rainy day. In my Lola, my grandmother, used to say it tastes like a warm hug. I simply nodded, focusing on the potential bacteria in their own meal. Finally, the day came to leave Manila. We were loaded into a sturdy apat pickup truck, its bed filled with scientific equipment. As we drove north, the claustrophobic concrete jungle slowly gave way to vast, open plains of the most brilliant green I had ever seen. Rice paddies stretched to the horizon, dotted with solitary carabaos, or water buffalo, patiently tilling the soil under the watchful eyes of farmers. It was undeniably beautiful, and by geologist's eye, however, saw something else. It saw a massive floodplain. Its basin created millennia of sediment washing down from the surrounding mountains. A fertile land. Yes, but also a natural conduit for floodwaters and volcanic mudflows. Every picturesque village we passed, with its simple homes made of wood and woven bamboo, I mentally flagged as a high-risk settlement. The soil here is incredibly fertile, Isa said, noticing Ive's gaze. It's Ela. This region is called the rice granary of the Philippines. It's alluvial, I responded. Linay tone flat, deposited Gisa rivers. Prime territory for liquefaction during a seismic event. Isa fell silent for a moment, then looked at me. You see danger everywhere, don't you, Doctor? It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. It's Ive's job to see it, I replied curtly. It's what keeps people alive. Is it? She murmured, so softly I wasn't sure if I was meant to hear it. As we drove further, the distant, jagged silhouette of the Zambales mountains came into view. And among them, one peak stood out. Not teeth its height, but teeth its broken, caldera-crowned summit. Pinatubo. It looked deceptively peaceful from the distance, its slopes now covered in carpet of green. It was hard to imagine the sheer, planet-altering violence that had been unleashed from its heart. Yet, I knew. The data was etched into my memory. The ash cloud that had circumnavigated the globe. The pyroclastic flows that had moved at the speed of a jet plane and were hot enough to melt glass. I felt cold not form in my stomach. It was the feeling I always got when it was near a major geological threat, a mix of professional fascination and deep, primal fear. She looks quiet today, Isa said, her voice filled with a strange reverence. I raised an eyebrow. She? You refer to the volcano as she? Of course, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. To the indigenous Eta people who have lived on these slopes for thousands of years, she is a Pomalyari, the great provider, a powerful spirit. They believe the 1,991 eruption happened because the mountain was angry, because people forgot to show her respect. I couldn't help but scoff. A quiet, dismissive sound. Respect. And love. Reyes. The eruption was caused by the subduction of the Eurasian plate beneath the Philippine Mobile Belt, leading to the pressurization and eventual degassing of the dacitic magma chamber. It had nothing to do with respect. Ihlay explanation was textbook, precise, and utterly devoid of magic. Isa simply smiled that patient smile of hers again. Maybe the science is just the language the mountain uses to speak to us when she's angry. This kind of thinking drove me insane. It was a refusal to face the brutal, impersonal reality of nature. It was wrapping terrifying truth in a comforting blanket of folklore. But it was a blanket, I believed, that would provide no warmth when the fire came. The weather had been hot and humid all day. The air brilliant, cloudless blue. But as we began our ascent into the foothills, a change began to occur. The blue sky became bruised with purple and gray clouds that seemed to boil up from behind the mountains. The air grew heavy, the light turning a strange, ominous yellow. The monsoon, Isa said. Her cheerful demeanor replaced GIT professional focus. The radio says a tropical depression has intensified into a storm. It's heading this way. A part of me, the cold, analytical part, felt a grim sense of validation. Of course. Here it was. The predictable unpredictability. The constant, looming threat had been lecturing about for years. The rain started as light tapping on the windshield. But within minutes, it became a torrential downpour. The world outside our windows dissolved into a blur of green and gray. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. The road, which had been a dusty track, was rapidly turning into a muddy river. Isa's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the treacherous path ahead. Isa's own hands were braced against the dashboard. All my scientific knowledge, all my data and models, were useless now. We were just two people in a metal box, at the mercy of a mountain and a storm. In a land that was more convinced than ever was designed for destruction. The real journey, I would soon learn, had only just begun. The rain was no longer just falling. It was a solid wall of water. Percussive roar that drowned out the sound of the engine. The muddy track we were on had dissolved into churning brown torrent. Ahead of us, a small creek we had crossed earlier was now a raging river, carrying with it small branches and debris. Isa slowed the truck to a crawl. Her face illuminated by the dashboard's glow. She was tense, but focused. I, on the other hand, felt a surge of adrenaline that was part fear, part cold, detached sense of being proven right. This was it. This was the reality of the Ring of Fire. Not the smiling people or the quaint folklore, but this raw, untamable power. We can't cross that, she stated, her voice tight. And we can't go back. The road behind us is probably washed out now. She pulled out her phone. But there was no signal. She tried the two-way radio to contact the Five Oaks base. But all we got was static. There's a radio dead zone in these hills, she muttered. More to herself than to me. Okay. New plan. Yinva's mind raced through emergency protocols. Find high ground. Stay in the vehicle. Conserve resources. Wait for rescue. That was the logical, scientific thing to do. Isa, however, did something completely illogical. She turned the truck onto a smaller, barely visible track that led deeper into the trees, away from the main road. What are you doing? I demanded. Yilduhi voice sharper than intended. There's a small barrio. A village. Just a few kilometers from here, she said, her eyes scanning the path. It's not on most maps. We can take shelter there until the storm passes. An unmapped village. We should stay on the main route. That's where rescuers will look for us. Doctor, she said, turning to me for a brief second. Her usual bright eyes now serious and intense. In a storm like this, on the slopes of this mountain, Lahar is the real danger. Not the water, But the mud. A river of wet concrete that can bury this truck in seconds. The main road follows the valley. It's a natural lahar channel. That village is on a small plateau. It's the safest place to be right now. You trust your data. I trust the local knowledge. Please. Trust me on this. I had no choice. Every instinct I had screamed against venturing into the unknown. But her logic about the lahar was undeniable. I had studied its destructive power. She was right. The valley was a death trap. We drove for what felt like an eternity. The truck slipping and sliding on the muddy path. Finally, through the grey curtain of rain, I saw the faint glimmer of a few lights. We had arrived. The village was a collection of about 20 or 30 small houses. Some made of concrete blocks. Others of wood and bamboo with galvanized tin roofs. They were clustered on teepees of land slightly higher than the surrounding area. It looked fragile. Temporary. In my heart sank. This was their idea of safety. A few feet of elevation against the fury of a volcano. As we pulled into the small, muddy clearing that served as the village plaza, people emerged from their homes. But there was no panic in their eyes. There was concern. Yes. But it was calm. Focused concern. An older man with deeply lined face and a quiet air of authority approached our truck. Isa rolled down her window. Mang Lito. Kumusta po? Ang lakas ng ulan. She called out. The man, Mang Lito, nodded grimly. Isa. Iha. Mabutit nakarating kayo rito. Delikado sa ibaba. He looked at me in the passenger seat with curious but welcoming eyes. Your guest? Yes. This is E.C. Alan Carter. Doctor. This is Mang Lito. He's the barrio captain here. I nodded stiffly from in the seat. Mang Lito simply said, Welcome. You are safe here. Come inside. Let's get you dry. We were ushered into a small, simple house. The floor was polished cement. The furniture was sparse but functional. An elderly woman, Mang Lito's wife, immediately handed us dry towels and warm cups of something sweet and gingery called salabat. The warmth spread through my chilled body. But I couldn't shake my deep knees. I felt trapped. Vulnerable. Cut off from everything I considered safe and reliable. As I stood beside the window, watching the storm rage, I witnessed something that my scientific mind could not process. I expected to see people hunkering down, protecting their own families, waiting in fear. Instead, I saw a community in motion. A group of men were on the roof of a neighboring house, tying it down with ropes to keep the wind from peeling it away. Several women were in a communal kitchen, cooking over a wood fire in huge pots. The smell of garlic and stewing meat filling the air. Children were gathered in one of the larger houses, being looked after beside the older girls, their laughter occasionally audible over the sound of the rain. No one was shouting orders. No one seemed to be in charge. They just worked. A seamless, coordinated effort born not of a manual, but of instinct. What's going on? I asked Isa, who was speaking quietly with Mang Lito. They are preparing. She said simply. Preparing for what? The storm? For the storm. For the possible flood. For a power outage that could last days. For anything. But it's so organized, I said. The word feeling inadequate. Isa smiled. We call it Bayanihan. She said. It's the spirit of community. When there's a crisis, you don't just look after your own family. You look after everyone. The community is one big family. I watched as two teenagers carried a heavy sack of rice through the mud to the communal kitchen. No one told them to do it. They just saw a need and filled it. It was inefficient to Western standards. There were no designated team leaders. No written protocols. No formal chain of command. Yet, it was more effective than any disaster drill I had ever observed. It was a living, breathing system of mutual support. In America, I thought to myself, it would be every man for himself. People would be hoarding supplies, boarding up their own windows, ignoring their neighbors. Here, the first instinct was not to take, but to give. Not to isolate, but to gather. Later, as the evening deepened and the rain continued its relentless drumming on the tin roof, we were all called to eat. We sat on long wooden benches in Manglito's home, which had become the impromptu command center and dining hall. We were served a simple but hearty stew of chicken and vegetables with rice. It was hot, flavorful, and profoundly comforting. I found myself eating more than I had in days. I sat next to Manglito. He ate in silence for a while, then turned to me. You are a man of science. Isa tells me, he said in surprisingly good English. You study the mountain. Yes, I replied. I study the dangers. He nodded slowly, looking out the open door at the rain. Apo Malyari gives us many dangers, he said, using the Eta name for the volcano. She took Tilay first home. Lindol farm. Everything. Buried under 6 feet of ash and mud in Siyamnaput Isa. I was taken aback by his calmness. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling hollow. Elif, did you come back? Lala rebuild here. So close. He looked at me. And his eyes, though old, were clear and steady. Because she also gives us life. He said simply. You cannot have one without the other. This is our home. You do not abandon your home because you are afraid of it. His words were simple. Yet they struck, chore deep within me. Placed in my data and charts could never reach. For the first time on this trip, I was speechless. I was a world-renowned expert on geological hazards. Yet this old farmer, who had lost everything to a volcano, understood something about living with risk that had never even considered. I was an expert on how to die. He was an expert on how to live. The storm raged through the night. I barely slept. In the mind you whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. I lay on a simple woven mat, a banig, on the floor of Manglito's living room, listening to the symphony of the typhoon. The wind howled like a hungry beast, rattling the windows and shaking the small house to its foundations. The rain hammered on the roof. Deafening. Continuous roar. Every so often. If gust of wind would be so violent, I was sure the roof would be torn clean off. Yet, all around me, the other members of the household slept peacefully. Their breathing was deep and even. A stark contrast to my own anxious wakefulness. They had placed their faith not in reinforced concrete or advanced weather forecasting, but in their small, hand-built homes and in each other. They had surrendered to the power of the storm. Not with fear, but with an acceptance that felt both alien and profound. I, who had spent a lifetime trying to predict and control nature, felt a humbling sense of my own powerlessness. Morning came not with the sun, but with a gradual lessening of the storm's fury. The wind died down to a strong breeze, and the torrential rain softened to a steady, gray drizzle. The world outside was transformed. The landscape was washed clean, the greens of the jungle looking impossibly vibrant against the dark, wet soil. Small waterfalls cascaded down hillsides where there had been none before. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and ozone. The village was already awake and buzzing with activity. People were assessing the damage. A few tin roofs had been peeled back at the edges, and a large acacia tree had fallen at the edge of the village, narrowly missing a house. But no one was injured. No homes were destroyed. There was a sense of relief, but also an immediate shift into recovery mode. The men were already working together with saws and axes to chop up the fallen tree for firewood. Women were sweeping water and mud out of their homes. Children were splashing in the newly formed puddles, their laughter echoing in the misty air. Isa found me Isa the window, a mug of steaming, dark coffee in her hand. Brewed coffee, she said, handing it to me. From beans they grow right here on the hillside. They call it capibaraco. The coffee was strong, dark, and slightly chocolatey. It was the best I'd ever tasted. How are you, doctor? She asked, her expression genuinely concerned. I'm all right, I admitted. I expected more damage. They know how to build here, she explained. They build with the wind, not against it. The bamboo in their walls can flex. The nipa palm roofs can breathe. The houses are designed to bend, not break. It's another lesson from the mountain. Rigidity is weakness. Flexibility is strength. Her words resonated with what had seen last night. The community itself was flexible, bending with the crisis, not breaking under its weight. Later that morning, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, Manglito approached me. The river will still be too high to cross today, he said. You and Isa will be our guests for another day. Come. Since you are a man of the earth, I want to show you something. I was hesitant, still feeling out of place. But Isa gave me an encouraging nod. I had little choice but to follow. Manglito led us away from the village. Not down towards the main road, but up a gentle slope, following a muddy path that wound through a thick grove of trees. The air was humid and alive with the chirping of insects and the calls of unseen birds. After about 15 minutes of walking, the trees thinned, and we emerged into a clearing that took the breath away. Before us lay a sprawling orchard. But it was unlike any orchard I had ever seen. The trees were mango trees, their branches thick and gnarled, heavy with fruit that was just beginning to ripen. They were planted in neat rows that followed the contour of the land. But it was the soil that held my attention. It was black, deep, rich, almost impossibly dark soil, littered with small, porous gray pebbles. I bent down instinctively, scooping up a handful. It was light and airy in Zer's palm. I crumbled it between easy fingers. Volcanic soil. Tephra. Pumice. And ashfall from an ancient eruption. This is your farm? I asked Manglito. Elbo's voice filled with disbelief. This is it, he said with a quiet pride. This is what Apo Malyari gave back to us. I stood up and looked around, truly seeing the place for the first time. I had been so focused on the composition of the soil that had missed the bigger picture. The entire area was a gentle, rolling landscape of small hills and shallow valleys. It was a classic Lahar floodplain. The very ground we were standing on was composed of the destructive mud flows that had roared down from the volcano 3 decades ago. And my scientific mind reeled. This land should be barren. Lahar deposits are notoriously infertile at first. They are often acidic and lack the organic nitrogen necessary for plant life. It could take decades, even centuries, for the complex ecosystem to re-establish itself. How is this possible? I asked, turning to Isa, expecting a scientific explanation. The soil. Lahar is not fertile. Isa smiled and looked towards Manglito. Elif, don't you tell him. Manglito. The old farmer walked over to one of the mango trees and gently touched a leaf. When the ash first came, he began, his voice soft with memory. It was like a gray snow. It covered everything. The world became silent and gray. Then the rains came, and the mud flows followed. It buried our homes, our fields, our past. We had nothing. Many people left. They went to the cities, to resettlement areas. They said this land was cursed. Dead. He paused, his gaze distant. But my father, and his father before him, they knew the mountain secrets. They taught me that after the fire comes the new grass. After the anger comes the gift. He bent down and, like me, picked up a handful of the dark soil. This ash, this sand, it is full of minerals. Potassium, phosphorus, iron. Everything the plant needs to grow strong. The first few years were hard. We planted hardy vegetables, things that could break up the soil. We let the rains wash the acid away. We worked the land. Inlay family and I. We did not fight it. We listened to it. And slowly, it came back to life. Stronger than before. He looked at me directly, his eyes holding a wisdom that transcended geology. You see danger, doctor. You see disaster zone. You see death. I see the greatest fertilizer in the world. I see the soil that grows the sweetest mangoes in all of Philippines. He gestured for me to follow him to a small hut at the edge of the orchard. Inside, his wife was slicing freshly picked mangoes. The flesh of the fruit was a vibrant, fiery orange, and it dripped with juice. She offered a slice to me on a small plate. I took it, my hand trembling slightly. The scent was intoxicating sweet, floral, and utterly perfect. S brought the slice to my lips and took a bite. The flavor that exploded in his mouth was indescribable. It was a wave of pure sweetness, but complex sweetness, with notes of honey, citrus, and subtle, Almost floral perfume. It was rich, creamy, and completely fiberless. It wasn't just a fruit. It was an experience. It was the taste of sunshine, of clean rain, of rich earth. It was, without a single doubt, the most incredible mango he had ever eaten in the entire life. All the data, all the reports, all my preconceived notions about this cursed land dissolved in that single, perfect moment of sweetness. I stood there in the humble shack, the sweet nectar of the mango still lingering on my tongue, feeling the foundations of his entire worldview begin to crumble. The taste was more than just a flavor. It was a revelation. A piece of empirical data delivered not to the instruments or the computer models, but directly to my senses. And this single data point contradicted everything I thought I knew. I looked from the slice of mango in my hand to the dark, volcanic soil outside, and then to the broken-crowned peak of Pinatubo, standing silent and majestic against the clearing air. The connection snapped into place in my mind, not as a cold scientific equation, but as an earth-shattering epiphany. The destroyer and the creator were one and the same. The ash that had choked the air, the mud flows that had buried towns, the very agents of death and devastation, were the source of this unparalleled life, this impossible sweetness. The logic was so simple, so elegant, so profoundly perfect that it shamed the complex, risk-averse calculations. I had spent the entire career mapping out the howd of destruction, the physics of pyroclastic flows, the geology of lahar channels. But I had never once stopped to ask about the what next. To these people, the eruption wasn't the end of the story. It was the violent, fiery, terrifying first chapter of a new beginning. The best mangoes in the world are grown in Zambales and Guimaras, Isa said softly, noticing the look of astonishment on his face. Both places have soil rich in volcanic deposits. It's not coincidence. I turned to Manglito. A professional arrogance stripped away, replaced his raw, humbling curiosity. But the risk? I stammered, the words feeling foolish even as I said them. The volcano is dormant, not extinct. It could happen again. How can you live with that uncertainty? How can you invest your life in a place that could take it all away again in an instant? Manglito set down the bamboo basket he was holding and looked at me with an expression that was not pitying, but deeply empathetic. Doctor, he began, his voice patient, like a teacher speaking to a slow-learning student. Your life in America. Is it certain? You have no storms, no earthquakes, no fires. Do you not get sick? Does your car not crash? Is death not waiting for all of us? His questions were a volley of simple truths that hit me harder than any scientific argument. I thought of Asa's own life. And was sterile, predictable, insured to the hilt existence. I had built walls of security around myself, a stable career, a good retirement plan, a house in a geologically stable area. But I was still living in fear. A quiet, gnawing fear of the unknown, of the unpredictable. It had made me cautious. Yes. But it had also made me rigid, cynical, and emotionally detached. Manglito, who lived in the shadow of a sleeping giant, was freer than it had ever been. Uncertainty is a part of life everywhere, he continued. It is the price of being alive. The difference is, here, we see the rewards every day. He gestured to the orchard around us. Apo Malyari. She reminds us that life is a cycle. She takes, but she gives back more. She teaches us that to have a harvest, you must first survive the storm. She teaches us to be strong, to work together, to have faith. She is not just a mountain doctor. She is our greatest teacher. At that moment, a group of children ran laughing into the orchard, chasing a kite. They ran barefoot on the black volcanic soil, their brown skin shining in the sun. They were not afraid of the ground beneath their feet. They were born of it. They were nourished to it. They were playing on the very remnants of a cataclysm that had terrified the world. And they were the living, breathing proof of Mang Lito's words. Life wasn't just possible here. It was joyful. It was resilient. It was thriving not in spite of the danger, but because of it. The constant presence of the volcano had forged people of immense strength and unshakable faith. They didn't deny the risks. They embraced them as part of a larger, sacred balance. They had achieved a symbiotic relationship with a force of nature that the culture only sought to dominate or escape. Something inside me broke. It was the dam of cynicism and fear it had spent decades building. It was the rigid wall of scientific detachment that had kept me safe, but had also kept me from truly living. Tears welled up in his eyes. Hot and unexpected. Alan Carter. A man of facts and figures. A man who hadn't cried in 30 years. Stood in a mango orchard in the Philippines and wept. The tears were for my own ignorance. For my arrogance in thinking understood this land. They were for the sheer, overwhelming beauty of the cycle of life and death I was witnessing. They were tears of shame for having looked at these people and seen only victims, when in fact they were the most courageous survivors I had ever met. Mang Lito's wife came over and gently placed a hand on the arm. She said nothing. She just stood with me, offering a silent, compassionate presence. In that simple, human gesture, I felt a sense of connection and acceptance that hadn't realized I was starving for. Isa led me to a small wooden bench under the shade of a large mango tree. I sat down heavily, feeling emotionally exhausted but strangely light. Are you okay, doctor? She asked, her voice gentle. I could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I looked at her, at the genuine concern in her young, intelligent face. She wasn't just a scientist. She was a bridge between the world of data and her world of stories, of faith, of community. She understood both the subduction of tectonic plates and the danger of Apo Malyari. And I realized that her perspective wasn't unscientific. It was more complete. It was a holistic science that encompassed not just the physical world, but the human spirit that inhabited it. If thy science had been a two-dimensional map, black lines on white paper, hers was a living, breathing, three-dimensional world, full of color, flavor, and soul. I have been so wrong, I finally whispered. The admission costing me my pride but granting me my humanity. So incredibly wrong. Isa just smiled. It wasn't an told you so smile. It was a smile of welcome. You weren't wrong, doctor, she said kindly. You just hadn't seen the whole picture. It's hard to see the new life when you're only looking at the ashes. I stayed there for a long time, just watching the life of the orchard unfold around me. I watched Manglito patiently showing a young boy how to tell if a mango was ripe. I watched his wife weaving palm leaves into a basket. I watched the children play, their joy echoing through the trees. And he understood. The greatest resource of the Philippines wasn't its minerals, its forests, or its fertile lands. It was this spirit, this indestructible, life-affirming ability to find sweetness in the soul of sorrow, to build community on the slopes of a volcano, to look at a mountain of fire and call it home. The rest of the day passed in dreamlike state. And by scientific mission. The whole reason was here. Now felt secondary. Almost trivial. Yeliv's objective had been to collect data on lahar deposits. To measure their depth and density. To model their potential paths in a future eruption. I had come to quantify threat. But now, standing on that very threat, I realized my work was fundamentally incomplete. It was like describing Cathedral UI only measuring the thickness of its stone walls, without ever mentioning the art, the faith, or the music that filled it. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower, painting the air in hues of orange and purple, Manglito took us to the place he called the Canyon of Creation. It was a short walk from his farm, following the path of a small, crystal-clear river that snaked its way through the landscape. The river was not made of smooth stones, but of gray, volcanic sand. The path grew steeper, and the sound of rushing water grew louder. We rounded a bend, and a stop in the tracks. Speechless for the second time that day. We were standing at the mouth of a vast, spectacular canyon. The walls were towering cliffs of layered rock and compacted ash. A geological tapestry that told the story of Pinatubo's violent past. Each layer dark gray, light brown, reddish-orange represented different eruption. Different pyroclastic flow. Different chapter in the mountain's history. It was a textbook cross-section of a stratovolcano's deposits, brought to life. But it was the river that was the true artist. Over the past 3 decades, the water had carved its way through the hundreds of feet of lahar and ash deposits, sculpting the canyon into a breathtaking masterpiece of sheer cliffs, graceful curves, and hidden grottos. Waterfalls cascaded from the canyon rim, feeding the river that had created the very chasm it now flowed through. All of this, Manglito said, his arm sweeping across the vista. All this beauty. It was not here 30 years ago. This was a flat, barren plain of ash, a desert of gray. I could hardly believe it. Why geologists' minds struggled to comprehend the speed of the transformation. The sheer power of water, combined with the soft, unconsolidated volcanic material, had created a landscape that looked like it should have taken millennia to form. It was accelerated geology. Nature's creation story played out on fast forward. The river, he continued. It did not see westland. It saw a path. It carried the seeds. The birds came. The trees grew back on the canyon rim. The water carved a home for itself. This canyon is a reminder from Apumalyari. Even from the ugliest destruction, something beautiful can be born. You just have to be patient enough to see it. We walked deeper into the canyon. The air was cool and filled with the fine mist from the waterfalls. The late afternoon light filtered down from above, creating an ethereal, almost sacred atmosphere. It felt like walking through the nave of a great, natural cathedral. I ran my hand along the canyon wall. It was rough, gritty, and cool to the touch. It was the very material I had spent my life studying. The stuff of nightmares for civil engineers and disaster planners. But here, it was the medium for the most incredible sculpture I had ever seen. I saw Isa standing beside the river's edge, letting the cool water run over her fingers. She wasn't analyzing the flow rate or the sediment load. She was simply experiencing it, being present in the moment. She looked up at me and smiled. "She's a powerful artist, isn't she?" she said, referring to the mountain. And for the first time, I didn't correct her. I just nodded in agreement. As we made our way back to the village, the weight of F's decision began to settle upon me. If my research grant, LRI project, in the entire professional reputation was built on a specific framework, risk assessment. I was here to produce a report for the Exit and Five Oaks. Document filled with hazard maps, probability statistics, and evacuation route recommendations. It would be a valuable report, one that could potentially save lives. But it would also be a lie. Or, at least, a profound half-truth. To describe this place only in terms of its dangers felt like betrayal of Manglito, of the vibrant community, of the sweet mangoes, of the magnificent canyon. It would be like writing a biography of a great artist and only mentioning the time they had cold. That night, after another simple, shared meal, I sat on the porch of Manglito's house. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a sky so clear it was littered with a billion stars. The air was cool and clean. I opened the laptop, the glow of the screen feeling intrusive in the natural darkness. I pulled up the research proposal, the one I had spent months drafting. It was titled, A Quantitative Analysis of Lahar Flow Dynamics and Hazard Mitigation Strategies in the Pinatubo-Sacobia River Basin. It was clinical, detached, and utterly soulless. It was a document that saw only the problem, not the people. It saw the ashes, but not the life that grew from them. With deep breath, I created a new document. The cursor blinked on the blank page. A silent invitation. What could it possibly write that would do justice to what it had experienced? How could it translate the taste of a mango, the feeling of Bayanihan, or the wisdom in an old farmer's eyes into the sterile language of a scientific report? The choice before me was clear, yet difficult. I could stick to the original plan, write the report I was paid to write. It would be easy, safe. His career would continue on its predictable path. Or, I could risk it all. I could change the entire focus of his research. I could tear aside to tell the whole story. I would face ridicule from his more orthodox colleagues. LV funding could be questioned. I might even be accused of going soft, of letting sentiment cloud my scientific judgment. But to do otherwise would be a disservice to the truth I had discovered here. The real story of Pinatubo wasn't just about its eruption. It was about the resurrection that followed. It was a story of human and ecological resilience that was more profound than any disaster model I could ever create. I looked up from my laptop at the dark silhouette of the volcano against the star-dusted hill. It no longer looked like a threat. It looked like promise. Promise that even after the darkest night, the sun will rise. Promise that from the deepest sorrow, the sweetest fruit can grow. I began to type. The new title was not title for geological report. It was the title of a story. The symbiosis of fire and faith, study of human resilience and ecological rebirth in the shadow of Mount Pinatubo. In that moment, I ceased to be just a geologist, as became witness. The next morning, the river had subsided enough for us to leave. The farewell was surprisingly emotional. Manglito's wife packed us a small bayong, a woven bag, filled with ripe mangoes and steamed rice cakes wrapped in banana leaves. Manglito clasped my hand in both of his grip firm and warm. "Come back, doctor," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The mountain still has many stories to tell you." "I will," I replied. And the words felt like a solemn vow. "Thank you for everything." As we drove away, I watched the small village recede in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed inside the jungle. It was the place that didn't exist on any of its maps. Yet it had become the center of a new world. The drive back to Manila was the reverse of our journey out. Not just in direction, but in perception. The vibrant green rice paddies that had previously seen as geological floodplain, I now saw as a testament to generations of cultivation and deep understanding of the land. The carabao patiently tilling the fields were not just beasts of burden, but partners in timeless dance with the earth. The small villages, once dismissed as high-risk settlements, now appeared as pockets of incredible strength and community. Even the chaotic traffic of Manila seemed different. I no longer saw just chows. I saw a complex, unwritten system of cooperation and negotiation. A million teeny acts of yielding and asserting that somehow kept the entire city moving. It was the spirit of Bayanihan on metropolitan scale. The eyes had been opened, and I could never see the world through a old, narrow lens again. Upon returning to the Five Oaks office, I immediately requested meeting with the Institute's director and the senior research panel. I was nervous, my heart pounding as I walked into the conference room. These were serious scientists, people I had initially dismissed as being too focused on folklore. Now, I was about to present a concept that was far more radical than any of their legends. I scrapped the original presentation. Instead of showing them hazard maps and data charts, I started telling them a story. I told them about being stranded by the storm, about the village that wasn't on the map, about the spirit of Bayanihan. I told them about Manglito, a man who had lost everything and gained a wisdom that shamed him. As described the canyon carved from ash and the impossible sweetness of a mango grown in the soil of disaster. As I spoke, I could see the skepticism on some faces. But on others, particularly the older scientists, I saw nods of understanding. They knew. They had known all along. Their legends of Apomalyari weren't denial of science. They were a way of understanding its profound, and often paradoxical, consequences. When finished, as put up the new title of the proposed study on the screen, The Symbiosis of Fire and Faith. There was a long silence in the room. I thought I had failed. Then, the director, a stoic woman in her 60s, took off her glasses and looked at me. Chay Carter, she said, her voice even. For years, We have been trying to get international partners to understand that disaster management in the Philippines is not just about engineering and early warning systems. It is about understanding the culture. The resilience of our people is our greatest geological asset. Yet it is one that can't be quantified on any chart. She put her glasses back on and a small smile touched her lips. I believe your new research direction is not only valid. It is vital. Proposal approved. The relief that washed over me was immense. It felt like a validation not just of ISWA research, but of ISWA transformation. With the full backing of 5 Oaks, I threw myself into the work with passion hadn't felt in decades. ISWA research was no longer confined to soil samples and seismic readings. I spent weeks, which turned into months, living in Manglitos village and others like it. I was no longer just an observer. As became a participant. I helped with the harvest. My hands sinking into the rich volcanic soil. I sat with the village elders, recording their oral histories of the eruption, listening to their stories of loss, survival, and rebirth. I learned that the Eta people, the indigenous group who lived on the slopes of the volcano, had an even deeper understanding. They had predicted the 1,900 at 71 eruption weeks before the scientists did. Not through instruments, but by observing the behavior of the animals, the drying of the rivers, and the whispers of the mountain itself. They had fled to higher ground long before the official evacuation orders were given. Their knowledge, passed down through countless generations, was a form of science of deep, intuitive observation. My days were filled with discovery. I learned about the unique farming techniques they had developed, using specific plants to naturally recondition the acidic volcanic soil. I learned about their intricate social systems of food sharing and mutual support that ensured no one in the community went hungry, even in the leanest of times. I saw how they had turned that disaster into an industry. The volcanic sand and gravel from the riverbeds were now being quarried and used to build cities all over the country, providing jobs and income. Tourists were beginning to come to hike the stunning new crater lake and explore the canyons, bringing another source of livelihood. They had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to them and had woven it into the very fabric of their economy and identity. It was the most profound act of creative alchemy he had ever witnessed. This wasn't just a story about the volcano. It was a story about the unconquerable nature of the human spirit. The Filipino spirit. In my initial 3-month assignment stretched to 6. Then to a year. I wrote back to my superiors at the exits, sending them not just my research findings, but personal letters filled with experiences. As described the profound sense of community, the unshakable optimism, the deep-rooted faith that allowed these people to live happily on some of the most geologically volatile land on the planet. I argued that the current models of risk assessment were flawed because they only measured vulnerability. They completely failed to measure the countervailing force of human resilience. At first, ESLA reports were met with confusion. But as it continued to send back data interwoven with these powerful human stories, a shift began to occur. Junior researchers started emailing me, intrigued with the new approach. A few academic journals expressed interest in publishing narrative-driven findings. I was no longer just a geologist. I was becoming a storyteller, an anthropologist, a student of the human heart, all in the shadow of a volcano. In my year in the Philippines culminated in a final report that was unlike anything the exits had ever received. It was a thick document, But it was filled with as many photographs and personal testimonies as it was with geological data. It included a detailed analysis of the mineral composition of the lahar deposits. Right next to a recipe for a local dish made from ferns that only grew on those same deposits. It featured a seismographic chart of the volcano's dormancy, alongside a transcript of an elder story about the mountain's slumber. I concluded not with a list of recommendations for mitigation, but with powerful argument that the Filipino model of resilience, a blend of strong community ties, deep faith, and an incredible ability to adapt and find opportunity in crisis should be studied and celebrated as global standard. I called it the Pinatubo paradigm. I flew back to the United States, changed man. The familiar sights of Israel's homeland now seemed alien. The wide, orderly highways felt sterile. The sprawling suburban houses, each separated by a manicured lawn, seemed like islands of isolation. In the supermarkets, with their flawless, identical-looking fruits, I found myself searching for mango that could match the imperfect, sun-kissed sweetness of the ones from Mang Lito's farm. But never found it. I had left America seeing it as the pinnacle of safety and order. I returned seeing it as culture that, for all its wealth and technology, was deeply impoverished in the things that truly mattered: community, resilience, and a joyful acceptance of life's beautiful, terrifying uncertainty. EI presentation of ESAB findings back at the main Nixit headquarters was the most important of his career. The room was filled with the top minds in the field. EI former colleagues. The very people I had stood before a year ago, warning them about the disaster zone. This time, the opening slide was not an image of an erupting volcano. It was a photo of Mang Lito, his face weathered and smiling, holding up perfect golden mango. I told them his story. I told them everything I had learned. I concluded by saying, "We have been asking the wrong question. The question is not, why would people live in such dangerous place? The question we should be asking is, what can we learn from the people who not only survive, but thrive in such a place?" The Philippines is not a case study in disaster. It is a masterclass in humanity. The silence that followed was even more profound than the one in Manila. Then, someone at the back of the room began to clap. Soon, the entire room joined in. It was a moment of complete and total vindication. And my life took new direction. The Pinatubo paradigm became a recognized concept in resilience studies. I was invited to speak at conferences around the world, not just as a geologist, but as an advocate for community-based disaster preparedness. I used to be positioned to secure grants for Filipino scientists and to help fund community projects in the villages around Pinatubo. I became a bridge, helping the world to see the Philippines not through the lens of pity, but through the lens of awe. I return to the Philippines every year. My friendship with Isa and Mang Lito deepened into something that felt like family. I would bring ISBA students, young geologists, not just to study the volcano, but to learn from the people, to eat their food, listen to their stories, and have their own perceptions shattered. Give the taste of a mango grown from ash. Iva's story is not about geology. It is about the transformation of a man who thought he knew everything and discovered he knew nothing. It is about a country that had arrogantly labeled as a disaster zone, a place of chaos and peril. But it was wrong. The Philippines is the furthest thing from the disaster. It is a miracle. It is a nation of people who have mastered the art of living. They have built their homes on the most volatile ground on earth. Yet they possess a serenity and joy that richer, safer nations can only dream of. They have faced the worst that nature can throw at them: earthquakes, volcanoes, typhoons, and they have responded not with despair, but with a song, a shared meal, and an unbreakable will to rebuild. They are the strongest, most resilient, most beautiful people I have ever had the honor of knowing. The fire of their volcanoes does not just destroy. It forges. It forges the land into a state of breathtaking beauty and impossible fertility. But more importantly, it forges the spirit of the people into something unbreakable. A spirit of courage, of community, of faith. A spirit that can look into the heart of a cataclysm and see the promise of a new beginning. I came to the Philippines to study the mechanics of death. I left having learned the secret of life. My name is E.C. Alan Carter. And I am a geologist. But more than that, I am a humble student of the Philippines and its extraordinary people. The greatest teachers I have ever known. So, here is the final, corrected answer to the question posed so arrogantly all that time ago. Would anyone choose to live in the Philippines? You do it because to live there is to understand that from the deepest wounds, the greatest strength is born. You do it because to live there is to know that even after the most destructive fire, life doesn't just return. It returns more beautiful and sweeter than before. You do it because living in the shadow of a volcano teaches you to live every single day with courage, gratitude, and a love for the community around you. You don't just live in the Philippines. You become alive there. Have you ever had an experience that completely changed your perspective on place or people? A moment that shattered your prejudices and opened your eyes to deeper truth? Share your story in the comments below. Your journey could be the one that inspires someone else. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of transformation and discovery. Thank you for listening.